Hello and welcome to Module 2, which focuses on language learning targets. In this video, we will learn what learning and assessment targets are, why they are important, and what are the criteria to evaluate them. Let's start with defining what a target for learning and assessment is. People often mention what education can bring or the goal of education. This is a general statement of how educated people can contribute to the society. For instance, education can bring a qualification so people can find a job, or it can help people to meet the needs of the society and improve themselves. These goals are often long-term. In contrast, learning targets are more specific statements of what students should be able to do or feel after being taught some contents after a period of time. An example of language learning targets may be: students can use English verb tense flexibly in classroom communication. Learning targets can be classified according to their level of specificity. General learning targets indicate the results of a long academic journey. An example can be student control of English grammar. Meanwhile, specific learning targets are the results of student learning in a short time. It can be students' use of the English verb tenses, for instance. Learning targets can also range in their mastery. If students have to practice the whole life to reach the target, they aim at developmental learning targets. An example is student ability to write creative and interesting stories. Mastery learning targets, on the other hand, often point out what students can do after a period of learning. They are similar to specific learning targets that I have just mentioned. Now we can move to the explanation of why we should have learning targets. As you may know, in modern education, there is a strong relationship between learning targets, teaching, and assessment. After setting clear learning targets, teachers start planning and conducting their teaching and assessing student outcomes. After teaching and assessing, the teachers can base on the results they get to set new learning targets, and a new cycle of education can start. Setting clear learning targets can greatly improve teachers' teaching. First, teachers can base on the learning targets to decide what learners need to learn. They need to make the learning target clearer by providing examples of the tasks the learner should be able to do. For example, if teachers understand the learning targets well, their students will also understand the requirement for them better. The learning targets also help teachers to have a map of the course and all the lessons, then provide the activities for the student to learn in each lesson. Finally, with the learning targets, teachers and students know whether they have changed in the way they want and have achieved the learning targets. The more clearly teachers specify the learning goals, the clearer the directions of teaching and learning become. As for assessment, specific targets are also important. For one thing, the general planning for an assessment procedures is easier by knowing the specific outcomes the teachers wish learners to achieve. The teachers will have something to count on while they are planning. Then the selecting, designing, and crafting of assessment procedures depend on the teacher's knowledge of the assessment targets which should be assessed. Finally, the evaluation of an existing assessment procedure, such as how the content of a test is relevant to a course, is easier when they base on specific learning targets. Next, let's discuss an important content: how to write a learning target. Well, as a rule, you should include three main components when writing a target. 1. The target knowledge or skill. 2. The performance level. And 3. The conditions in which this performance level is reached. This is one example. Learners are able to identify the main ideas of a short lecture, given that the lecture is given in a moderate speed and sounds are clearly articulated. Now that we have known what a learning target is, why it is important, and what are the parts in a target, we shall consider how good a learning target is. Can you think for a moment what are the criteria we can base on to evaluate a learning target? Here are some practical criteria. First, Please make sure all the learning targets focus on the student. They should state what the student can do rather than what the teacher aims to do. They should also be appropriate to the language level of the student and the local standards, such as B1 or C1. In addition, be sure the list of learning targets is limited to include only the important outcomes for the course. In other words, they should represent the course outcomes. Next, the learning targets need to be consistent with the teaching philosophy and general goals of the school. For example, if competent-based teaching approach is being used in teaching, the language assessment should also be competent-based. Then, the learning target should match currently accepted language learning principles such as communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching, etc. It is highly important that a learning target states the performance level the students are expected to perform a task, such as understanding, or applying, or creating, which we will discuss in detail in the next video. Moreover, learning targets should be appropriate to the time limit of the course and can be taught with the available resources. It is unfair to put students under a great pressure and to ask them to perform tasks which they do not have the resources to do. Thus, focus, appropriateness to student and time and resources, consistency with the content and principles, and performance basis are some criteria teachers should remember in evaluating the contents of language assessment. I hope you can apply the knowledge on learning targets and the criteria right now on the contents of a test you are developing at your school. Thank you for following us in this video.